Greetings, everyone. I hope you are having a fantastic day, morning, noon, night, weekend, whatever the case happens to be for you. My name is Damon Caskey, and I will be your temporary instructor. Now, right off the bat, I want to do a little bit of house cleaning before we go any farther. I am likely as not going to be mangling some names. I do apologize for that. Also, my camera apparatus is here whilst my main screen and controls are here, so I'm probably always going to be at a quarter turn. Then again, if you came here to view head-on my ugly mug at the lower right corner of a screen, then I'd probably owe you an apology for that alone. So those things out of the way, let's jump right into the class content. Now this week's segment is going to be all about paradoxes. Not quite the type you see here in the background Mr. Extra was kind enough to provide for us, but more of a quandary faced by sellers and content providers. How to deliver personalized content without scaring away or annoying the consumer. In other words, at least compared to most modules and segments in this class, we're going to be looking at things from the perspective of the enemy. Now the question is known as the personalization privacy paradox. It is a phenomenon studied at length by Aguirre et al. In their publication titled Unraveling the Personalization Paradox, the Effect of Information Collection and Trust-Building Strategies on Online Advertisement Effectiveness. That's quite a mouthful, and it is also the basis for most of our segment today. Before we deep dive into that, though, let's touch on some of our overarching topics. So let me change slides here. All right. We will begin with personalization from a perspective of the content itself and delivery methods. This is important because it will help establish why the paradox exists and what motivates providers and sellers. Next, how do consumers react to information collection? This is the primary focus of Aguirre et al., and it deals with the sometimes, mostly, contradictory behavior exhibited by consumers about use of their information. By name, we'll cover psychological ownership, perception of vulnerability, and perception of trust. After that, we're going to switch gears with a quick review of the case study by Stenanto et al. That touches on user gratification theory and information theory boundaries. Both of them are facets of psychological ownership. So with that all out of the way, we can begin the class itself, and we shall start with personalization. Anyone here know the theme song for Cheers? I can't play it for you legally. I'm not going to sing it, and this show was a little bit before my time, so I can't tell you everything about it in granular detail. But I can say that it was all about going where everybody knows your name, your favorite watering hole, your favorite spot where you feel like you're welcome and you're part of the gang. This is very pertinent to our discussion because as social creatures, your average Q human is attracted to personal service. There is a reason salespeople are trained to be gregarious, use first names, learn customer habits, and look you in the eye. Oop, camera's there. Look you in the eye. I can give you an anecdotal example from growing up in a small business family. We have file cabinets of information that we keep on our customers, and my mother is a master of using them to know everything possible about everybody that walks in the door. And they know this, and they are very appreciative of it because when you come to a small business, you expect that personal service. They want to be called by their first name. They want to tell their story. They want to feel like they are a part of our establishment. And that fosters customer loyalty, and for that matter, we just enjoy doing it. We even have a slogan, although you can go a little far with it, and I'll get to that in a moment, that says, "One with things to sell who whispers in a well is not apt to get the dollars as one who climbs a tree and hollers." Not grammatically correct, but very true. However, you can take this too far. I'm sure we have all encountered the overbearing salesperson who wears out your first name, bursts your personal bubble like a lost ant, and otherwise just spins out their personal capital. The type of salesperson who has very clearly paid too much attention to the training and not enough attention to the spirit of the training. And even if you don't have an overly pushy salesperson, well, there are always personal outliers. I mean, even though the basic tactics of personalization are proven across averages, there are always backfire risks. I am an example myself. More than once, I've walked away from something I would have bought on the spot because the seller is trying to sell it to me. And they're not even being that pushy. They're just being a natural salesperson. They're doing what they're supposed to do, but that's just too much for me, and I'm out the door. May not be fair to them, but that's just the way it is, and that's the way certain people are, right? Now, imagine this from an online perspective. Now you're facing twice the challenge, 10 times the challenge. You have to attract consumers that are without any travel or time restrictions. I mean, when somebody walks into our building, for instance, or walks into Bed Bath & Beyond or Best Buy or whatever, they had to make an effort to get there. They've put in a time investment, and they're going to have to put a time investment if they go someplace else. But online, not so much. If you don't grab their attention right away, they push the button on their mouse or touch their phone screen, and they're gone. And you have to do all of this without any of the human cues an in-person seller can leverage. Now, because of all that, online retailers rely heavily on customer data in hopes they can personalize the experience. However, just like the overly pushy in-person sales tactics driving customers away, online personalization has similar pratfalls for the seller. Per Aguirre et al., and I'm going to read this verbatim. Let me look at my notes here. Here we go. Retailers gather data about customers' online behavior to develop personalized service offers. Greater personalization typically increases service relevance and customer adoption, but paradoxically, it may also increase customer sense of vulnerability and lower adoption rates. In short, if you get too personal too quickly, you will scare the fish away, and that's not a cheer. Well, how exactly do we get that information in the first place? That is with two collection types. Now, per Aguirre et al., those collection types fall into the categories of overt and covert. And we're going to start with overt. Overt collection involves information the customer knowingly and willingly provides. Some examples might include phone numbers, filling out survey forms, conversations through chat boxes, and other types of direct feedback. Now, you can also collect information passively and it still be overt. For instance, a retail site might ask permission to use location data from your browsing device. If you provide that information and they use it, but you know that, it is still technically an overt collection. Now, the disadvantage of overt collection is that it requires customer participation. Humans are humans. Most customers will simply refuse, if nothing else, out of a reflexive laziness. I mean, do you want to fill out a form? Because I sure don't. But worse, the customer may also find these collection attempts very frustrating and very pestering. Who here has not logged out of a site because you were trying to purchase something or trying to browse and they were asking, hey, do you want to chat? Hey, do you want to fill out this form? Hey, please establish yourself with us because it'll make it easy to shop next time, blah, 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 blah. You know what? No, I don't want to chat. No, I don't want to join your club. No, I don't want to tell you my blood type. And no, I'm not looking at your site anymore. Click, and I'm gone. That is the danger of overt collection. Covert collection, of course, is an entirely different animal. It is exactly what it sounds like. Entities collect information about customers covertly, without their knowledge or permission. Simple examples might include recording what widgets a customer buys, when, and how many. I guess another example might be collecting browser clicks and the use of the customer's physical location, except without their permission. Sellers can also buy or trade information from each other. For example, a seller might purchase data collected by a social networking site, combine this with their own consumer data, and then they attempt to deliver personalized content or advertising based on an algorithm of the customer's data, customer's habits. Of course, overt collection has its own danger from a seller's perspective, and that is when the consumer perceives a breach of trust. Consumers tend to regard information about themselves as belonging to themselves, even if this is publicly available information such as a home address. Now, let me give you an example here that I could do. If you're not aware, property data is public domain. Now, this means that just by going to the Canvas class list, I could find your names and take my happy self down to the nearest courthouse and start collecting property addresses. Not only would I know your property addresses, I would know your property lines, which would tell me, oh, I wonder how much land this person owns. From there, I could glean a little bit of demographic data, even if it's a kind of a guess. I'm not going to be too off the mark, and start sending you targeted advertising. Thing is, I'm pretty sure if I did that, most of you would be fairly perturbed, and with good reason. That is known as the perception of psychological ownership. Even though that information does not belong to you per se, it is about you, and therefore you perceive it as yours. And by my using it without your consent, that leads to what we call, I'll say what McGuire et al. Calls a perception of vulnerability. To wit, when a customer discovers information used without consent, they may experience a perception of vulnerability. Now I'm going to look over my notes here and read you something verbatim again from McGuire et al. Because they have, here we go, an example that isn't just something I'm using as like an imagined possible site. This is something that really happened. In 2012, a company known as Urban Outfitters, I'm sure you've heard of them, launched a website that personalized the customer experience by gender. Customers were quick to realize personal information was collected and used without their permission, leading to backlash and Urban Outfitters abandoning the customization concept. So again, the same thing. Much of that information used may well have been publicly available, and information that wasn't publicly available was easily collected through passive observation. And yet, because of the psychology of ownership, it resulted in a perception of vulnerability and breaking the perception of trust. Now, there are proponents to covert collection, believe it or not. They argue that these techniques are less invasive because, unlike overt collection, they don't interfere with the customer experience. They don't require customer participation. Detractors, of course, counter that overt techniques lead to a perception of trust, resulting in long-term loyalty even at the expense of short-term sales. So going back to the example I gave you, if rather than going out to the courthouses and finding out what your addresses and physical locations were just from your names, I instead asked you what your addresses were, human nature being what it is, most of you would probably refuse. But the ones that did provide me that information, we would have a stronger relationship of trust. You would know because I have informed you that I want that information and that I want to use it to contact you in the future. So you're probably more likely to purchase from me, or at the very least, I am less likely to glean negative press. Now let's move on to our next slide here, and we'll look at the thought process that psychological ownership actually consists of. Sellers hoping to balance the act of asking with annoying and collecting without frightening have turned to various studies attempting to unlock the buyer's defensive reflexes. One such study is titled The Personalization Privacy Paradox in the Attention Economy by Julian Clark. Clark's findings are similar to Aguirre's in that consumers prefer personal experiences personal experiences with minimal effort, but are sensitive to any perceived breach of trust. Clark summarizes the consumer's privacy decision-making process in the flowchart that you are currently viewing. Now, Clark acknowledges that every consumer is different, and thus this process can be very mercurial, as each individual places different priority on the pictured facets. Also, as noted by the dotted connection, facets like awareness can vary not only from one individual to the next, but within the same individual at any given time or incident. I mean, we all have different personalities. Some of us, our sphere of awareness, this stuff isn't even in it. So that dotted line is more like a blank, right? But some of us have a very strong connection to prior experiences. Some of us are all about trust. Some of us, I've often said in my own writings that all I really care about is the risk to benefit ratio. I don't really give a spit about trust or privacy because I consider that a separate issue. Everybody is different, which is the reason that this flowchart kind of goes all over the place. But the nodes here, the facets, do hold true. Everyone views their privacy evaluation as a combination of prior experiences, trust, concerns, risk thoughts, benefits, information disclosure, and of course the awareness of all these. Now, whether or not you are consciously aware of all this, I hate reusing words like that, the flowchart still holds true. In short, this is all a delicate balance for providers, leading to ever more sophisticated collection method techniques and granular behavior research. Or in other words, this is a constant arms race between the algorithms that try to gather your information to sell you the widget versus your natural human instincts and defenses against it. Now, let's move on to a case study. For a more hardware example of the privacy paradox, we'll look at the study by Julian Santero addressing the personalization privacy paradox. Much shorter title, right? Now, this study covers some bullet points that, well, we'll just have to walk through them one by one. First, that consumers live in a world where information about their purchasing behavior, online browsing habits are collected, analyzed, combined, used, shared, and often instantaneously and invisibly. Second, that during a survey, over 1,000 responders across 10 countries were worried that smartphone-enabled mobile applications would erode their information privacy. Now, I've obviously broken the 6-6 rule with these bullet points, and I seriously doubt they're news to anyone, which is why I'm kind of glossing over them. However, what Statano does give us that is a little more profound are theories of behavior. The first is the uses and gratification theory. Now, according to Satanos, the uses and gratifications theory states that customers use media for its own sake. To elaborate on this a little bit, customers will use technology just because the technology impresses them or because they enjoy using the technology. For instance, playing video games would probably be the quickest example I could think of. You don't get any practical value out of it. You're just enjoying the technology because it is there. I guess I'm thinking 5 years ago during the Pokemon craze when people were searching for Pokemon everywhere. Again, no practical value per se, but people were still online and still searching because they enjoyed using the technology. They enjoyed using the applications. They enjoyed using the media simply because it was there. Sellers can leverage this. If a seller puts their site together correctly and they can create that perpetual need or that rotational need, then you as a consumer will keep coming back for more. Then we have the information boundary theory. Now this goes back to our psychological ownership. In fact, it's almost the same definition. With information boundary theory, informations try to control the outflows of private and valued information to other parties. And it looks like I'm just now discovering a typo on my PowerPoint, so I have to apologize for that. Now, we've already elaborated essentially on what the information boundary theory is. This is just giving us kind of a different name and a slightly different perspective on it, but it comes down to, again, that we want control, we want agency over the information that we are putting out. And of course, these two facets are proven with the surveys above. I mean, you have 1,000 responses across 10 countries that say mobile applications would erode their information privacy. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone, like I said earlier. And this concludes our segment, at least our formalized segment. All right, and that takes us into the personal thoughts subsegment of our segment. Now, as you can see here, I am a big believer that Big Brother is watching you. And I also believe this applies to our segment directly. Why? Well, that's easy, because the only people that are more motivated to try and keep tabs on you than the people who want to control you are the people who want to sell you a widget. Now, that said, I have stated many times, and I'm going to reiterate here, Big Brother is not a new phenomenon. He didn't spring into existence just because we started carrying computers in our pockets. He didn't come about because a guy named George Orwell, actually his name was Blair, but I digress, penned 1984. Didn't come into being because we had transistors or vacuum tubes or anything else going along the technological timeline. Big Brother has been around since before somebody scribbled something on a cave wall, and probably always will be. And for those reasons, I actually fear the rising power of Little Brother a lot more. Now, that's a subject I could go on about all day long, but now is not the time for it, so we'll save that for another day. Since we are being informal here and my throat is a little parched, let me just grab a drink. Oh, by the way, water. Water is what you need. Coffee is bad for you. Probably just failed on that note, but you said be opinionated, and I've never been afraid of such a thing. Now, when it comes to the actual materials, the research papers that provided our sources here, we are, if I'm not mistaken, supposed to critique those and state whether or not we agree or disagree with their research. I think that it would be supremely arrogant on my part to say that I either agree or disagree just because these are peer-reviewed papers, meaning they're dealing mostly in facts. It would be like saying I agree or disagree with the presence of the sky or the sun or the earth is the earth round? I don't know. We'll talk about this some other time. What I will say is that I agree with the conclusions, but if I were to offer a critique, it would be a waste of effort on the part of the researchers. I realize that nothing is true until it is proven, but even so, did it take a group of PhD researchers and peer review papers to come up with the concept that humans are lazy, that we don't like to be bothered, and that we want personal service? I mean, really? That required that much thought and effort? I think that those efforts would be better served. Let me bring up my slide here and go backwards a little bit. Looking at ways to educate awareness so that we can make these little dashes dotted. I mean, after all, one of the biggest problems with privacy evaluation is that we don't know from person to person how much awareness they're going to have of trust, of privacy concerns, of the risks, or of any sort of information disclosure. In other words, it's a good bet that a lot of people are just plain oblivious, and that's not necessarily their fault. We don't we don't educate folks a lot in this sort of stuff. And I think that is a gaping hole that the research could go towards, rather than asking the obvious. I mean, do a quick survey, sure, just to prove it. We can say it's been peer reviewed, but don't spend 45 pages. Actually, I believe it was 45. It was either 22 or 45. I don't know why I'm not remembering that correctly, but let's say it was 22. We don't need to spend 22 pages to find out that people don't like putting forth effort and that they want to be left alone. I mean, really, that would be my only critique. Otherwise, I think the research was spot on. I think that it did come to the correct conclusion. And I think that if we were to continue with it, it just needs to, again, drill down to a more granular level and look at ways to educate and counteract those negative facets of human behavior. That, in turn, would lead to better information awareness. And at that point, we might not have to worry so much about privacy concerns because they would take care of themselves. That's really the only I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I'm sure I will once I close this document out, but at that point, just feel free to ask me and I'll be glad to discuss some more. So then, thank you very much for listening to this. I hope that it proves fruitful, or at least proves not negatively fruitful, and have yourself a good evening, afternoon, morning, day, whatever the case may be. Be well.